Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And what we try to do in the one day of this event is to give you as broad a set of perspectives, topics covered, obviously opinions from both analysts and suppliers and telcos. I'm delighted that for the final debate, before we go into a wrap-up panel, the final debate is around the edge, which got mentioned at various times during the course of the different discussions. I think Mike Sherman even kicked off with some comments about the edge very early this morning. So I'm delighted that we're now going to bring it together and look at this issue of the edge and where it is, and of course how we're going to make some money from it and its relevance to the industry. Once again, we've got 4 contributors to this. I'm delighted that the opening contribution is from Andy MacLeod, former CTIO of Vodafone International, industry legend, or whatever we want to call him. Thank you. Andy MacLeod, all yours.
Thank you. That's a bit scary, the idea of being called a legend. But I am no longer in Vodafone, having retired from corporate life about 18 months ago, and I have some. My title's not up there, but I'm doing kind of advisory stuff now. And this topic is a topic that I've been kind of immersed in for a good 11 or 12 years. In fact, in 2008, we kicked off a project in Vodafone then called Savvy. It was there wasn't a MEC acronym then, to basically do 3 things: to solve the problem of vendor concentration. By the way, there were 8 vendors there. There's like 2.5 now, right? In the RAN, to get an open RAN. Effectively, which is kind of the predecessor, I guess, of what Open RAN is now. Solve the computing utilization problem, as we called it then, which is that if we were a hotel company, we would have been bankrupt because we didn't utilize our network very much at all, especially at the edges. Right? And so how did you get more loads, more workloads on the bits that weren't being used? So the statement was, how did you do billing right on the base station right overnight when they weren't being used, kind of idea. And the third one was to create a platform for sort of integrated apps. So how could the radio talk to something that was a general purpose processor, and you could do, in theory, all sorts of cool things with that. That was in 2008. We pulled that project in 2014 for a variety of reasons. One was 3G was really hard to work with. IUB and all that kind of stuff was really hard to break into. x86 wasn't up to the job at that point. It took another 3-4 years, well, 2-3 years to get up to the kind of workloads that it could do. And the traditional suppliers didn't like this idea. Not unsurprisingly. And so, particularly around radio, made life quite difficult, although we give Nokia a mention because they are actually the only people who actually built a Savvy box and displayed it in a darkened room at the back of their stand at Mobile World Congress, I think in 2014. So again, thanks to those guys. And that program kind of actually in 2014 morphed into the MEC initiative that the industry had. I think kicked off originally, and the acronym was, I think, originally generated by Intel, who were part of the ecosystem we created, and then sort of became various other ETSI versions, and now is a thriving community. So I thought a reflection on what were we trying to do with that box. So what were the use cases that we had then? Because that sort of come back to more sort of modern consideration of, is this thing going to be useful? Is there an opportunity for the telcos, which I think is the debate question. So we had 4 cases which might seem rather strangely familiar to you, right? Latency. We wanted to do caching at the edge, lower the latency for getting video out of the system, and then browsing, because 3G wasn't very good, particularly the uplink was horrible, right? So the whole browsing thing was really not as nice as it needed to be on a mobile. So putting the content and the processing at the edge would help all of that. So quality experience case. There was an efficiency case, which was about compute efficiency. Could you use that more widely, like the billing case I mentioned? And again, transmission. Could you reduce the amount of transmission that was in the system, particularly the backhaul, the local, and the sort of the metropolitan part of the network, if you like, to get better utilization of their assets and reduce cost. Third one was integration. So these apps that it allowed you to link attributes in the radio base station with general purpose apps that were, so things to do with location or presence or identification of basically the early thoughts around autonomous cars and the IoT space. And then lastly was enterprise, machine to machine as it was called then before it became IoT, and stadiums, factories, and retail, which was, could you do retail inside using sort of more closer processing involving the appearance of somebody next to a stand and you push them an advert and all that kind of stuff. All great use cases. But really none of those ever caught anybody's eye. And never got the traction to actually do that. And there's been lots of POCs, lots of niche apps that or a number of niche apps that have been deployed in that infrastructure, but it's never gone mainstream. So why is it seemingly going mainstream now? Right? So we had an announcement by Beth and Verizon. Vodafone were part of that announcement universe, saying AWS, letting AWS into their network. Maybe I didn't say that quite the way I should have done, but anyway. And so, that's a pretty big difference. Deutsche Telekom announced 3 or 4 days ago that they were deploying wholesale infrastructure based on their own cloud technology. There's an awful lot of talk about MEC in all of the conferences. We've got it on the agenda here today, which is a definite indicator that it's hit the big time, because, Chris is, a trendsetter, always has been. So why is it, now going live? Because actually those use cases haven't changed, right? So I think actually the reason, and we touched on it this morning, is 5G, right? Actually 5G, we've got lots of hype, right? We've got lots of movement towards buying spectrum, very expensive for the service providers. They've got rollout, which is happening. That's not cheap, right? And actually, arguably, it's coming quite quickly after they're still not finished with rolling out 4G. So it's actually a shorter cycle than the 4G, 3G cycle. And as you look at it, that's all happening. But again, we talked about it this morning, struggling for the use cases. And actually what's happened here with 5G is it's actually hijacked pretty much the use cases that were originally there for MEC, right? And that's, I would proffer that actually, on that basis, the 5G use case, and we talked about the was 5G a new G? I'm not sure it is, because actually when you look at a lot of those use cases, MEC plus 4G was pretty good, right? And what's interesting about this is now we've got this sort of this merging of the use cases for 5G and all the same languages being used, latency, enterprise edge, all that kind of stuff, right? And MEC. Now that's a good thing from my point of view. Thank you. That's a good thing from my point of view, because actually hijacking those cases, getting momentum behind it, means we'll build a MEC network. And I absolutely support the motion, I think it's an opportunity, and we'll talk about it in a minute, an opportunity to bring areas of value into the CSP world that we haven't been able to do up till now. I will go and sit down. Chris, thank you. Sorry.
Who's next? Thank you. Right, thank you, Andy. Lovely to have you back. Right, next we have Nitu Kaushal from Vodafone Business. So Nitu, welcome. First time at the Great Telco Debate. Welcome. And take it away.
Chris, I actually feel like a politician before an election, maybe 2 days before it takes place. So thanks for the opportunity. My name's Nitu Kaushal, and I have an exciting job where I get to look after the edge computing business for Vodafone globally. And I get to commercialize all of the great solutions that we're building from the heart of our network right into the hands of our customers across every industry that exists for Vodafone. And that's a really exciting place to be, because things are changing really rapidly at this point in time. And the interesting thing is, we see that in Vodafone that the topic of 5G and edge go hand in hand together. We see 5G driving up the speed requirement for our customers, and then edge computing to really look at how we reduce that latency down. So the two things have to really go hand in hand together. And if we think about the 5G investment that telcos are making at the moment, and I can maybe reference what Vodafone have done, spending almost $1/3 billion in 5G spectrum license spends per market in all of the major markets. It has to be exploited and capitalized. It has to be. So if we speak about the motion, I am very much for the motion itself, as I stand for Vodafone too. And thinking about that investment and that rollout into 7 different countries, 58 different cities, and thinking about how we can really take edge computing out to our customers then becomes a lot easier for us. So how are we really doing this? We're doing this in 2 ways. We're going to do one thing, which is taking a dedicated edge to our customers. So this means that we actually deploy a mobile private network on-premise for our customers and layer that on top with edge computing, a MEC. So this means that the proximity of that environment really matters to the customer. It means we can offer them that super low latency and high throughput services that they may require. So an example of industries that really leverage something like this could be an airport. It could be warehouses for manufacturing. It could be manufacturing plants themselves. So these are oil rigs, so really that offshore environment. So thinking about where connectivity doesn't exist today, where we can really take it out for our customers and sandwich on top a MEC can really bring a lot of value out to our customers. So that's one side of our edge story that we're thinking about. Then on the other side of the edge story is really where we look at distributed MEC. And this is what we term as our investment of our edge capability right into the heart of the 5G core network. So this is right, looking at our 5G masts, building in all of our core MEC capability. And we see that doing this by working with hyperscalers is going to be a really good option for us. So you heard from Beth earlier today from Verizon, how they have collaborated with Amazon Web Services. Vodafone has absolutely done the same thing as well. And we're working with them in Europe really heavily and extensively. And we're looking at how do we really build that distributed MEC for our customers. So it gives you that flexibility of a public cloud, but then at the same time, it gives you that low latency and high throughput across a variation of different services and industries. So we see here gaming to be really applicable, looking at live streaming analytics of video, so the video capture across smart cities, or maybe even augmented reality, virtual reality based services, and also autonomous driving as well. So looking at how do we enable all of that infrastructure to bring out those types of services. So it is going to be a long journey for us on the distributed MEC side, and launching this partnership does accelerate how we get to support our customers in Europe, but we are building a global proposition for our customers. And I will stop there and allow you guys to ask us questions shortly.
Thank you very much.
Once again, we're trying to get as many sides as possible. In the interest of time, could I invite to the stage, please? And I keep wanting to call you Phil Vickery, which is terrible, isn't it? John Vickery from BT. Thank you, John.
Hello. So I'm John Vickery, I'm from BT. I'm going to use the lectern and I'm going to walk around. I'm going to use a hybrid compute model today. So I always get asked the question, how do we define the edge? You know, the edge, wow, what a cool subject. How do we define the edge? So I looked in the Oxford Dictionary, and apparently the edge is defined as the outside limit of an object, an area, or a surface, or a network. It doesn't actually say network. But where is the edge? You know, everyone talks about, oh, we're at the edge. So we've got 1,200 multi-service edge nodes in our network at the edge of our core network. And then we want to push out further. So what is the edge? Just getting closer to our customers. Essentially, what we're trying to do is deliver the compute capability that can enable the applications our customer needs, but where they want to put the computers is their decision. The customers are in control of the edge. I spoke to a colleague of mine yesterday in our network strategy team, and I heard Mike Sherman earlier talking about, we believe in edge as an opportunity. We need to think smarter about how we monetize edge, so the telcos don't fall into the same trap as we did with CDNs. And I spoke to another guy yesterday who said, yeah, we believe in edge. I said, what's our view in BT? Well, we believe in it. So it's like a religion now, apparently. It's something that you believe in. And once upon a time, people used to believe that the earth had an edge. And if you sailed too close to the edge, you'd fall off. And some people still believe that today as it happens. But essentially, someone found out, a Greek philosopher proved that the earth is actually a sphere. And we're already on the edge. We're all standing on the edge. We're living life on the edge, man. And it just got me thinking about, how people define the edge. The edge is everywhere. It's computers, right? We're trying to figure out where we put computers. So, okay, we need computers. Let's put them in our businesses. They can run our business applications. Well, no, let's give everyone a computer. Everyone have a personal computer and everyone has their own computer. But we want to make it small, put it in your pocket, right? Okay, we're going to want to do it all back in the core now. We want to do it back in the core. We want to back it back at the edge, put it back in the business premises because we need the latency, we need the reliability. And I think what we need to think about is what is the business outcome that's going to help the customer make a decision on where they want to put their computers, on where they want to put their processing. We talk about the edge. We're already at the edge. Everyone's on the edge. And really what we need to deliver is the hybrid compute capability that deliver the outcomes our customers need. So they want more productivity, they want operational efficiency, they want to reduce their costs, they want safer workplaces, they want quality improvements, they want to reduce the amount of defects, they want trust, security. So how do we use the benefits of pushing that compute closer to the customer to deliver those business outcomes? So we've heard about latency. As an operator, we're constantly reducing the latency on our network. 5G promises lower latency, so every release, our latency is reducing. So when we're selling customers edge compute to deliver latency, and we know actually the network will be able to deliver that in 2 or 3 years, then how does that conversation go? As an operator, we understand where our network's going, we understand the roadmap, we understand the benefits of edge, so we can really articulate the journey and make sure that our customers are making the right investment so they're not, creating this technical debt that they've seen, which basically hinders their confidence to invest in technology. So we think it's about partnerships. We need to really drive the use cases and understand what are the key use cases our customers are going to need and who are the partners we need to work with. So you look at manufacturing, production, say data, video, analytics. Who are the machine vision vendors? How do we make sure that they can consume 5G as a technology, integrate that into their systems and give our customers the benefit? They've got potentially 5 proprietary compute systems all the way up their production lines in their factories running machine vision cameras for defect detection. So can we put in an edge compute platform? Can we connect that over 5G? And can we give that customer the benefits of edge compute along with 5G to reduce the failure points, to increase productivity? And there is, we've got lists of like 100 use cases, and we're going out speaking to our customers and understanding which partners we should be working with. So where is the edge? It's everywhere, on-premise, the regional opco edge, network cloud edge, virtualized RAN. Let's virtualize our RAN network. Let's put distributed units close to the edge. It's all happening. We're doing a lot of it in BT, and it's great fun. And looking forward to answering your questions.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, and our final expert witness is Azhar Saeed, who's the Chief Architect of Red Hat. Azhar, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for articulating what does edge look like and where is my edge? Because I do believe we've moved on from a conversation of why edge to where and how, also when. So there's no longer, 2 years ago we wrote a white paper on edge, and it actually came out of a conversation with one of the providers. And we described, and it was actually not my definition, but that provider's definition. It said edge is like an onion. You peel a layer, you'll find the edge. Then you'll peel the next layer to find the next edge. You'll peel the next one, you'll find another one. So in that sense, you can actually define edge as anything that sits between a consumer, an end user, and your core data center. So some people can classify this as the edge because this has enough computing power now to be able to be managed externally as an edge device. You could classify your CPE as an edge. You could classify as your central office as an edge. You could classify your regional POP as an edge. You could classify your regional data center as an edge. So any of those can be classified as edge. We actually created a layered model to not so much to say all these are different types of edge, but more to say there are certain requirements that are different in each of those contexts for edge. There is a requirement in the way you would manage a device versus in the way you would manage a CPE, versus a way you would manage a rack of equipment, versus a way you would manage a data center. So each one of them is very distinct with respect to set of requirements in that context for edge. So some people have actually used different terminology to do that classification. They call it near edge, edge, far edge, ultra far edge. We can keep adding, the word ultra to that. But majority of us think edge in the context of connectivity. We think edge in the context of connectivity models because that's what we're really used to. So we define edge as a point of where your cable head end terminates. We define edge as a central office. But if you actually look at it from an applications point of view and an end user point of view, what the end user really cares about is the 4 points that Andy mentioned, which is latency. What was the other one, Andy? Integration, latency, efficiency, right? Those are the things they care about. So to the point that was made earlier, which is, do you really care where that edge sits? The answer is no, you don't. As long as you're getting the service, as long as that particular application is deployed in the right place to be able to provide the service that you need as an end user. So what is accelerating that particular edge behavior, right? I believe if you look at 5G, 5G has become a big enabler. Could you have deployed an edge without 5G? The answer is absolutely yes, you could have. You could have deployed a split RAN architecture with edge. You could have deployed a control plane, data plane separation with edge. Without 5G, you could have deployed all of those things with edge. What did 5G do really is start people people began to think about what can low latency bring for me? What can these different use cases bring for me? That's what really 5G brought. 5G is another G in that sense, but it really brought that conversation to the table, which we didn't think about before. We didn't think about this in terms of high bandwidth, low latency. All of these things are achievable through massive MIMO, through LT, coordinated multipoint, through technologies that exist today. But 5G brought that into the forefront. That's why people associate edge with 5G or edge as an enabler with 5G. But you can deploy edge regardless of 5G or whatever, right? So the last point that I will bring up and probably sit down for Chris to actually put the motion on the table is if you look at we always talk about edge in terms of low latency, but we always talk about these use cases that are a little bit more hypothetical. We talk about connected car. Connected car works in a sandbox environment and a campus environment. Is it getting better? Yes, it is getting better. Do we have telemetry from cars that's actually going to the dealers now? Yes, it is. Tesla has already shown you how to do that. So that will improve and that will get better. But to go to a complete autonomous vehicle in terms of driverless vehicles, it'll probably take us some time. There are driverless trains today. Driverless cars will probably show up at some point in time. But if you think about using edge as a use case in the context of farming, in the context of that automated, connected, driverless tractor. That's a sandbox environment. That field is a sandbox environment. Can it operate in an autonomous manner? Absolutely. Can you actually apply machine vision there to pick the right set of fruits in an apple orchard? Absolutely. Can you apply? So there are use cases people are thinking about edge, regardless of whether they have connectivity models or not, because these are sandbox environments that edge is really enabling. So in a country like India, where you still have problems with LTE connectivity, and my phone still says edge, by the way, I wish Preeti was in the room, but they are talking about using edge and 5G type of technologies in a very different way to enable the rural user, to enable to be inclusive in terms of their population, and to actually drive these specialized use cases which we think will be available to us. So thank you, Chris. Up to you now.
Thank you. So, Graham.
Right. The final motion of the day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to squeeze past Andy. Thank you. Right. The final motion of the day is CSPs are ideally placed to exploit the compute, storage, and connectivity requirements wherever the edge exists. And I'm speaking in for the motion, and Chris is against the motion. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. I urge you at this final juncture, the final debate, to support this motion. And I urge you for the following reasons. First of all, it's happening, okay? So as we've heard from some of our speakers now, it's already underway, right? So how can you even dispute the fact that it's happening? And why is it happening? It's happening. I'm going to put a slightly different argument to some of the ones you've heard. It's happening because telcos are actually ideally placed to support this kind of service, right? It's the edge, it's everywhere and nowhere, but it is part of the network. It's part of the network that already exists, okay? Telcos are excellent at managing infrastructure, and the edge is just an addition to that infrastructure in a particular place. You can argue where exactly it is, but it's in a particular place. So it fits ideally with their skill sets, and it's absolutely inherent to the network architecture. So that's why I think you should support the motion. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Don't clap him. Who's that? Ladies and gentlemen, this raises a fundamental issue about the industry within which we've all been participating. And the fact that we're talking here about bringing together compute, storage, connect in location. And I think also, as you then referred to the issue of AI and the like in there as well. This is demanding a whole set of skills, a whole set of services coming together to address not the technology issues of our industry, of the telecoms industry, but actually the business issues relating to services sold into all those markets we talked about before lunch, the consumer and the business markets. And of course, when that happens, other players start to get involved in this. So we've already heard about the relationship that people like Vodafone and Verizon announced last week with Amazon Web Services. We've seen Google Cloud pushing very much into this space and looking at 5G to get their reach into what we do much closer. So actually, we're in a situation here where the potential providers of the services that support the edge, wherever the edge may be, actually don't just come from the telecom industry. Connectivity is part of the solution. It is not the solution itself. And I think one of the big questions that we ultimately need to go and ask is about, and goes back to what Matt Williams said from Telstra, is actually about where are those organizations on their journey? Where do they see the edge? Because we shouldn't be defining the edge. The edge should be defined by the way in which a device works, how it then connects into the different services. So actually, I don't believe the CSPs are ideally suited. I think it's raising a much broader issue about the relative role of the communication service providers in this now broader digital economy. It's sort of taken us back to where we started the morning. Graham, now I have a vague mental note to ask Andy Jones to make a comment. Andy, you there?
Yes.
So Ross, could you give the microphone to Andy Jones? I've no idea where that. I think Andy MacLeod badgered me several times to say, please ask Andy to make a comment.
Okay, Andy Jones, Jones the Phone Consulting and advisor on the Telecom Infra project. Yes, I was there at Vodafone with Andy 10 or 11 years ago, as he mentioned, when some of the embryonic thoughts on edge compute were first looked at. I left Vodafone shortly thereafter. For 10 years, I've been consulting and advising up and down the emerging edge computing supply chain. And actually, my question for the panel is about bang for buck in terms of, it's a little bit like you were saying, does 5G need edge compute more than edge compute needs 5G or vice versa? I'm going to postulate that a ubiquitous edge compute rollout, not at every tower, but at every aggregation site serving 20 or so macro towers, is 2 orders of magnitude less investment needed than 5G NR to every tower. Okay, now edge compute moves you into the top right quadrant of the use cases that everybody talks about with 5G, irrespective of the air interface. So I would hate with operators doing their 9 plus 15, what are we going to spend our money on next year right now, to be, it's really unimaginative to say the default is 5G NR enablement of every base station is the priority and everything else has to fight like crazy to compete with that. I would say blanket coverage with edge compute and filling in the white spaces. I see Williams here. So, you know, coverage, whether it be 5G or LTE, coupled with edge compute to enable these new applications on 4G and 5G coverage, and private networks with MEC on-prem, not building an entire private network on-prem for each and every customer, brings the service provider back into the value chain, pushing back on the build your own network CBRS movement. It's exactly what AT&T has done, for example. So I applaud I had a big smile on my face with the AWS wavelength announcement. I think that's exactly the right thing to do. It's a win-win. The web scales don't have the capillarity and depth of edge real estate in country, and they never will, and they'll never build out. And conversely, the telcos, well, there's 300 big ones worth worrying about to get a global footprint for an enterprise cloud edge offering. So that's the win-win between the two industries.
Thank you.
So yeah, if there's a question, it is bang for buck, what would you do first, edge or 5G rollout?
Wow.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, please, Azar.
Very based on the conversations, I'm sure Andy has an opinion.
I do.
But based on my conversations with different providers around the world, the approach that's more sound, logical, reasonable is don't look at it as I'm going to provide blanket coverage or I'm going to provide blanket connectivity. Look at it as from the point of view of what's the service you're trying to provide and how can you actually grow deeper into your infrastructure with that service. So the first deployment might be your regional data center. The next deployment might be your capitalizing on the RAN virtualization initiative that you have. The third one might be a managed CPE environment where you're going to host some applications using AWS Outpost. Don't know. The recipe is different for a different provider. In US, because of geography, we have different challenges. But if you go to a country like Austria or a country like UAE, where the end-to-end latency from one city to another is less than 5 milliseconds, what's edge? So you need to think very differently across the globe.
Andy, you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the challenge is the use cases, right? And that's kind of why I talked about use cases. I think there's a set of use cases that, like the mobile networks front, which is kind of like PBX on steroids, for example, for a private networks thing. It's a heightened version of that. But a lot of the stuff that people get really excited about with 5G and edge is things like AR. The problem with AR is that actually you need to have ubiquitous coverage, right? If you're sending out field engineers to fix people's boilers, right? That's not going to happen with 5G, right? Actually, it's going to happen with 4G because the problem is actually at the edge. Mm-hmm. And 3.5G massive MIMO doesn't help you get that kind of coverage. It helps because 5G is really focused around capacity, not coverage, right? So I think that's why I thought I wanted Andy's question out there because this is the real question: is to if you want to look at the use case and the business case and the attractiveness of a particular attribute, there are a couple of choices by which you can get to that, right? And one is more MEC, less 5G, or 5G, or that you can try and deploy, this newer technology to the edge, right? On the basis that it will drag the MEC with it, right? You still got to have the MEC thing, right? So actually, I'm quite supportive of it, which is why I wanted Andy's comment, because it's one I hadn't quite heard in that stark way before. That actually, I think it is a choice if what you're interested in is deploying the use case and therefore the revenue, right, rather than deploying a technology.
Now, I'm not sure I will happily, Nitu and John, if you want to comment, I suspect you probably don't, do you?
Yeah, I did have a small comment, if I can build on Andy's point. We definitely see that looking at the specific applications and what they need to do is where you need to start. Because if you've got applications that can work on 40 milliseconds, you don't really need a 5G network. So why should you expect your customers to invest in something like that? Or why would you want to be limited by a really heavy rollout plan where 5G isn't going to become online yet? So looking at those specific applications and looking at how you can leverage your existing network, and that could be a 4G network, can actually help customers get much closer to having that edge application already. So you don't need to have that dependency. So then in the future, where you're then looking at new applications that rely on ultra low latency, maybe that's really where you need to couple in a 5G based network, but you don't always need a 5G network.
4G Evo, just to make the point, will do 5 milliseconds, yeah?
Yeah.
John, do you want?
No,
Take
I'm
the
good.
fifth on that
I'm
one?
good. I'll take the fifth on that one, yeah.
I don't blame you, mate.
Okay, any more questions? Any more questions? Yes, over there. We've got a gentleman with his hand up there, next to Dean.
Nick? How about being defined by being next to Dean?
Next to Dean, yes, absolutely. Where's the edge?
I think my rugby's improving at this event. It's more a comment on the wording of the motion. When I see a motion worded, CSPs are ideally placed, that ideally makes me worry. I hear sounds of, I think, complacency in the industry. Because when I think about what I've heard over many years, the last 20 years, about different areas where telcos have said, this is our right, whether it's in hosting or in location-based services or payments, and various other comments we had at coffee and lunch and previous today, I hear the same kind of wording being used about edge. And what I actually see is I see like a pincer movement, where what's really happened is the web-scale companies haven't quite got here yet. They're on the device, they're in people's computers, they're in people's factories, they're in people's pockets on their smartphones. They've moved into the cloud computing space. There are CDNs being hosted inside carriers' networks. There are initiatives around the edge, around the Telecom Infrastructure Project, or around the AWS initiative that was mentioned a few minutes ago, which show they're interested in the edge and the RAN and the access side. And I don't see any reason why they can't get there as you end up with a more virtualized, more software-driven edge. I worry that if the industry is complacent, they'll lose that battle like the industry has lost many other battles.
Did you say they were in people's homes as well?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a pincer movement. They're on either side.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
They're closing in on that edge area.
Yeah, please.
Just one
Azar.
comment on that.
please.
I think that's a very important point, because the OTT players are eating telecom providers for lunch. The big battle between Netflix, Level 3, and Comcast, we all know about. Why did that happen? Because they are actually, all the telecom providers are providing connectivity. They're in connectivity business. They're thinking about connectivity alone. They're losing the battle of the applications, services, and so on. So that point actually is incredibly important, where already an Amazon has play in Edge, Google has a play with Anthos, so does Microsoft with Azure Stack, and you can actually see them very easily bridging the gap if the telcos are complacent.
Dean,
Yeah.
as we're over there.
I'll follow up on that and say, obviously, Amazon went out and bought Whole Foods, which wasn't about retail. It was about 700 city centre locations with lots of power, but I'll park that for now. Question, are the operators going to do local breakout for their edge computing. So that if two people are playing a game, let's say, one on Vodafone and one on BT, how does the game application speak between the Vodafone edge and the BT edge? Does it have to go all the way back to the core of the network to the interconnect, or can they interconnect locally? And if the edges need to interconnect locally, doesn't it make sense to just put them in an Equinix data center or something else, right? There's a neutral edge.
And I guess that's also true for the
automotive as well. Yeah.
Automotive
If
as well.
my car's on Vodafone and the other one's on BT, same. Absolutely. How do you do this interconnected edge?
So the local breakout piece is important as a technology, and that's what really makes edge computing work from a any service perspective. Pick any service, because the moment you separate control and data plane and you place the data plane at that particular edge, then you can do local breakout and do a handoff. That's critical from a mobile technology perspective to make edge really successful. Otherwise, you will have a walled garden services. A walled garden is where it's only for one provider. Okay. Anybody who uses within that provider. That's all you will have. You won't have ubiquitous, edge capability in that sense. Now, as far as the commercial aspects of that go, in terms of peering, in terms of data exchange, where would you put them? What's the most strategic place? I think that's left to the providers to answer that question. How are they doing it?
John,
I was going to say, I think it's about building the right capability for the right application. So I don't think there's going to be one edge network and everything's going to be run over that, including all your network functions and your gaming applications, business applications. There's a combination of models. Either we're deploying applications and functions at the edge to support our own network, and that could be media breakout, that could be, hosting distributed units for virtualized RAN, disaggregated RAN, or we could be running applications for consumers, or we could be running applications for specific businesses. Sometimes those businesses would prefer to have that compute function on their premise. Let's have it on our premise. We want data sovereignty. We want to localize our data. We want reliability just in case the network goes down. We want to be able to maintain our operations. We want simplified end devices, but we also want it scalable and like the cloud, and to operate and be orchestrated the same way as the cloud. All of our customers have got different needs, different requirements. And, I think as a telco, we operate in lots of different areas. And we're not saying that, the hyperscalers haven't got a place in the edge. Absolutely. We work with the hyperscalers. The hyperscalers need us and we need them. We have partnered for years and we'll continue to partner with them. And as long as we're delivering the most cost-effective services that deliver our customer requirements, hopefully, there'll be a place for us within that.
But just going back to Dean's specific question, which was around gaming,
yeah.
Right? How would that actually work?
So, could you run an application, a Vodafone customer and a BT customer, where essentially you break out at the edge to edge to edge? To be honest, I don't know the answer to that question, but I know that essentially we're going to need flexible models to be.
One of the attributes of the telecoms industry has been very good, right, at interworking. Right, traditionally, right? And in fact, the walled garden model is an IT model, is an OTT model. It's not the telecom model. We've got a few recent examples of where we were bad at it, right? Messaging would be one, right? RCS is an example, right? But this is something that actually we have a load of institutions and a load of culture, right, that knows how to do this, right? I don't think that's something that's necessarily an integral part of the discussions that are in the MEC ecosystem today, because actually it's not well developed enough for anybody to have probably had to have had that at this point, right? But, that's something that if the will is there and it generates enough collective money and control for the telco industry, I think that's something that would absolutely happen in terms of some sort of common interworking standard for breakout at the edge. It's like X2 or there's loads of standards.
Nitu?
If we put the customer at the heart of what we're trying to achieve here, in this scenario we're talking about a consumer. So from a telco perspective, whenever we've had services for consumers, we've always thought about how can we provide them with a service that doesn't break? So if that means there's a roaming aspect to that, then we will discover that at that point in time. But it is a new space for us. MEC today, definitely exploring in the B2B space, B2B2C for sure. But that kind of consumer arena is still very, very new. And we've got a job to do to activate how all of these devices or these different wearables are going to change so that all of these services can be consumed. So I think we're a little bit further away from that yet. But you make a very good point. But if we always keep the customer at the heart of what we're trying to achieve, I think that network-to-network relationship with the other telcos will come naturally.
I think what was interesting, if you look back at the, and this is a very UK-centric comment, but you look back at the 5G launches, I think all of the companies who launched 5G in the UK also announced a particular game that they were trying to seduce people to sign up for 5G. And I don't know if John Delaney, I can't remember who they were, but everyone had their own, there was a gaming company associated with each one. Graham, how are we doing?
Okay, right. Now, I think it's time for us to vote on the motion.
It is, yeah.
So let us bring over the adjudicator, Mr. Ross Parsons.
Jock Parsons. Yeah.
Right, thank you very much. So this is the last vote of this afternoon. Not the last vote of the week. There is another vote going on later on in the week, but I'm not allowed to adjudicate on that. So, can we have
you may as well, mate. Yeah.
Those in favour raise the green panel towards me, and those against the motion, put the red panel towards me. That is very. I'm going to give that to the Reds, I think. Yeah. There's a block vote of yes. It's gone to the Reds, just on a knife edge, I would say.
Thank you very much. Knife edge, very good. I like that. Very good.
50-50.
I'd like to thank you very much indeed, Andy. As ever, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.